following the 2020 United States presidential election and attempts by Donald Trump and Republican officials to overturn the election. Republican lawmakers initiated a sweeping effort to make voting laws more restrictive. According to the Brennan Center for Justice, as of March 24, 2021, more than 361 bills that would restrict voting access have been introduced in 47 states, with most aimed at limiting mail-in voting, strengthening voter ID laws, shortening early voting, eliminating automatic and same-day voter registration, curbing the use of ballot drop boxes, and allowing for more aggressive means to remove people from voter rolls. An analysis by the Washington Post described the effort as potentially amounting to the most sweeping contraction of ballot access in the United States since the end of Reconstruction. Supporters of the bills argued they would improve election security and point to substantial public distrust of the integrity of the 2020 election, as well as false claims of significant election fraud, as reason to tighten election laws. Opponents argued that the efforts amount to voter suppression, are intended to advantage Republicans by reducing the number of people who vote, and would disproportionately affect minority voters. They point to reports that the 2020 election was one of the most secure in American history to counter claims that election laws need to tightened, and argue that public distrust in the 2020 election arises from falsehoods pushed by Republicans, who they argue are now using the atmosphere engendered by their own lies as reason to advance voter suppression efforts. Republicans in at least 8 states have also introduced bills that would give partisan lawmakers greater power over election administration after they were unsuccessful in their attempts to overturn election results in swing states won by Democratic candidate Joe Biden in the 2020 election. Lawmakers in Alabama have introduced more than 24 election-related bills since the 2020 presidential election, including Republican-backed bills that would restrict early and absentee voting. House Bill 285, for instance, would ban curbside voting, while another would shorten the time voters have to mail in absentee applications from 5 days before an election to 10. Republican Rep. Danny Garrett actually proposed a bill that would increase the number of sites that voters can drop off their absentee ballots, which recently passed the Constitution, Campaigns and Elections House Committee. But it has faced consternation among other members of his party, with some objecting that it would provide for early voting. Rep. Chris Pringle, for instance, claimed that it would lead to primaries that are going to be stolen. Using this, they're going to bust them in and pack them out. Republicans have also broadly opposed bills proposed by Democratic lawmakers that would authorize no-excuse absentee voting and institute 2 weeks of early voting, following the announcement in early March that Alabama Secretary of State John Merrill would be appointed co-chair of the Republican State Leadership Committee's Group on Election Integrity, which is set to make recommendations on new policies related to voter rolls, voter ID, and absentee voting. Republican election integrity efforts are expected to accelerate. The first bill to be heard in the 2021 session of the Alaska legislature was Senate Bill 39, which would partially dismantle voting by mail systems used by Anchorage, Juneau, and other cities across the state, according to the Associated Press, by prohibiting cities and boroughs from automatically sending ballots to registered voters. Supporters say it would strengthen the security of the state's election system, while opponents have called it an attempt at voter suppression. At least 24 Republican voting measures have been introduced in Arizona. A measure passed in the Arizona Senate would require voters to include photo identification with mail-in ballots, outlaw private donations to help conduct elections, including for voter education, and give the state legislature the power to choose the state's electors in the Electoral College, regardless of the outcome of the state's popular vote. Another proposal would significantly decrease the number of polling locations in the state, including decreasing the number of locations in Maricopa County from 100 to 15. Rep. Athena Salman, the top-ranking Democrat on the House Government and Elections Committee, argued that definitely came in with a plan to make sure the historic voter turnout we saw in 2020 never happens again. On March 3, 2021, Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson signed into law House Bill 1112, which eliminates a provision that allows voters to sign a sworn statement in order for their provisional ballots to be counted in lieu of presenting a photo ID. Republicans have also introduced a bill that would shorten early voting. Republicans in Colorado have